This is Podco Media Networks.
It's the Innovation Podcast with Mark Reed Edwards and Garnett Harriman. Let's start the show.
Hi, it's Mark. In this episode, Garnett and I continue our discussion of the first set of episodes of the Innovation Podcast. And we start by talking about one of my favorite discussions. So one of my favorite discussions was with Larry Frank.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And we went into this. You know him. I went into it thinking, we're going to talk with a guy who runs a college, But his point of view and his purview is far wider than just running a college. It's about economic impact. It's about changing the lives of the students who go into this school and either then transfer out into a university afterwards or get a good job. And he's really focused on that, unlike anybody I've met in education. And I think that's because he's got a really broad resume, in politics and business, and he's got a really interesting point of view. I enjoyed that chat with him, which lasted about an hour and a half, and I could have talked to him for another 3 or 4 hours.
Yep, I know. He's a real Renaissance man. He's got a very wide-ranging intellect and a wide-ranging set of experiences. Partially due to his age. He's a little bit older than you and me, I think, and that's saying something. And
there are people older than me, which is good to know.
As shocking as it may be to the listening audience, there are people older than you and me. Yep. And but so I'm trained as a historian and a political scientist. Quote trained, right? That was my college degree, so whatever. But I haven't seen a guy like Larry since basically the history textbooks. Right. Larry, as far as I can tell, is an amalgam of what used to be called a unionist, right. and that's not necessarily a nice thing. That used to be, I think, a fairly derogatory term for for a period of time. But prior to it being part of this nebulous world of dubious dealings and corruption and stuff like this, for the 100 years prior to the 1940s, whatever, a unionist was actually a good thing. It was a way that society and business, and obviously labor in particular, developed to organize itself and to make things more efficient. I would argue you probably couldn't have had the first industrial revolution without a concurrent rise of trade unions,
Right.
And he works, so that would be his inner circle, in a concentric circle model. That would be his core. At core, he's a unionist, clearly. And then he has several outer circles that go to the areas that you were speaking of earlier. He was a political organizer. He was a university professor. He was a social organizer, even away from trade unions. So I think what happens, and this is going to be my last time, because I could wax prosaic about Larry for a long time. Yeah. I think the way that I look at what happened to Larry over his career is, starting from this narrow focus of unionism, he's become progressively more of an economic humanist. more about what it means to be a human being around the world, and the sort of basic economic needs about creating human dignity in your life. That's pretty much what I think he stands for.
Yeah, that's quite a lot to stand for, isn't it?
It is. I was trying to get it all into one sentence, and the sentence was way too long.
Translated from the original German.
Right.
So we also talked with Francesca Gino, who's someone I've known for a few years, and she wrote a book called Rebel Innovation. What's it called? It's called, I've got it on my desk here.
I think it's Rebel Innovation.
Yeah. No, it's called Rebel Talent. And she talked about a restaurant in Italy that looked at Italian recipes and just kind of turned them on their head. And she went and talked to people around the globe. She's a fascinating person because I think every few years she focuses on some new challenge and writes a book about it. And I'd love to have her on again to talk about some of the other things that we're trying to cover, like opportunity zones, elder tech, just to get her kind of learned point of view on these things.
Well,
and I'll try and convince her to come back on.
I think that's a great idea, and I volunteer to participate in anything having to do with Italian food.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we could do this on location in northern Italy. So
I'm thrilled if we were to sit at a table and she were to philosophize about like the food recipes, because that would leave more food for me. So
yeah, while she's talking, you're eating.
Exactly.
And the last person we had on before this episode, Bruno Aguiar of ESL Turtle Entertainment, we had a broad discussion about esports, not just about ESL, but he has an interesting perspective on the whole industry and sponsorships, and maybe taking the E off the beginning of it so that it's just sports. It's the future. I think you and I agree on that. In one of our one-on-ones a few months ago, we agreed that the NFL is in trouble. I don't know that Bruno necessarily agrees with that. That may be because he doesn't really follow the NFL as closely as us. Right. Being in the U.S., it's embroidered into our culture here, and just seems like sports like that are 5, 10, 15 years from now, whatever it is, will start to fade, and esports will replace them. And we're already starting to see that with ESPN and other networks actually covering Overwatch leagues and things like that. So it was great to talk with him to get his point of view.
I was impressed by him on multiple levels. The one thing I was really impressed with is, I figured I would try to lay a trap in one of the questions. And I posed him this, this hypothetical conundrum wherein, esports is becoming, esports businesses and experts and consultants are being courted by governments around the world, most recently in the UK, but also in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And the governments are trying to elicit, insights for policymaking. And my trap was, how did something that started so underground become so mainstream so quickly? And I thought he handled that really well. He handled it really well. I thought for sure he'd at least babble on a little bit before finding his feet, but he's very eloquent in his response.
Yeah, I didn't find any babbling in what he and in an area like esports, you're used to hearing people just babble kind of bullshit about what it's all about. But everything he discussed was rooted in reality. And
data and analytics. I thought, that's his actual day job is data and analytics. And I thought he had a good handle on not only the micro, the minutiae and arcana of it, but also he was able to connect it to these larger, the importance of that data to larger social and economic and political activities.
Right. Yeah.
That was, if you recall, that was part of his answer to my trap. Is that, the government, rightly so, is interested in trying to access some of this very, meaningful data about how a large segment of the population is conducting themselves and what they're doing. So it's all good.
Yeah, so there's a common thread, I think, through all these episodes. It's really fun to talk to interesting people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. By the way, that data thing reminds me that there's probably a third leg to this stool. I don't think it's just necessarily about innovation and experience. Data has come up in every single discussion that we've had.
Yeah.
And the importance of it. How do you get it? How do you measure it? How do you keep it private and safe? How do you give people control over their own data? Data has come up, I believe, in a meaningful way in every single conversation.
In this podcast, in Confessions of a Marketer, data is something I talk about all the time.
Yeah, it's a big thing, and I think it's a good filter. It's a good macro filter for looking at many, many areas of business.
Yep. I agree. So that's the first 23 episodes we did of the Innovation Podcast. And next time we're going to talk about what's to come. So stay tuned for that.
Thanks for joining Garnett and Mark on the Innovation Podcast. Visit innovationpodcast.co to subscribe and listen to other episodes.